So for the last few weeks, we've had various things going on, so we haven't had much time to work on the house. But as you can see, we have now removed the fish pond completely. There's a little bit of work to be done still to finish filling in this hole, and then we're going to essentially just plant it with grass and bring it all back to a standard state. This needs a bit of work as well, just to flatten things out. And of course, as usual, there's always a lot of stuff to be done in here, although we have now removed all of the ceiling panels and got rid of all of the junk that we didn't want. This stuff is all just various things that we are keeping or repurposing, and that will be dealt with in the future. And so, since I don't really have anything particularly interesting to show you this week, I thought I would tell you the story about our boiler installation. So we decided to go for this Combi boiler, and you might reasonably ask, well, if we had the opportunity to install a whole new hot water system, why didn't we go for something a bit more topical, like a ground source or air source heat pump? The government is really trying to push people to convert to these. Some parts of the country, you're able to get some pretty steep grants to help you with installing an air source heat pump. And it was something which did cross my mind. However, it was pretty quickly ruled out for us because of the way that our house is situated. So as you probably already know, our house is a terraced house, and it is obviously in a line of other properties. And it also overlooks a bunch of other little properties in a cul-de-sac. So if we were going to install an air source heat pump, pretty much the only place we would have to put it is right outside the front of the house. And in that situation, with the compressor running 24/7, it would just really be a real annoyance for all of our neighbors. This is a pretty quiet little street. There's not a lot of traffic noise. On the weekends, particularly, the only thing you can really hear is birds. So to have a massive heat pump running all the time, especially in winter when it's really cold, just would be a bit of a nightmare, and definitely wouldn't be good for our neighbor relations. So as much as I do like the idea of not having any reliance on fossil fuels, this gas combi boiler really was pretty much the only reasonable solution for us. And actually, as just two people living in a house with only very sporadic hot water needs, we don't actually have to use much gas at all. In fact, our gas consumption has actually halved over what it was with the old boiler with the tank system. And even now that we're going into the colder months and we're putting the heating on quite a lot, even on the days when we have the heating running pretty much all day, we're only adding about a third more to our gas consumption over what we were using just to keep the water hot previously. So this is clearly a much more efficient boiler, and it definitely uses a lot less gas than an old 70s one. So we did a bit of shopping around, and we eventually settled on this gas installation company, who shall remain nameless, but let's just say I wouldn't be keen on using them again. But one of the main reasons that we did choose them is because they offered a payment plan through a third party, which meant that we could spread the cost of the boiler over the next couple of years without having to pay any additional interest. So that really was a no-brainer, because it just meant that we didn't have to stump up a whole bunch of cash all in one go, and we could just pay it off gradually. But if we do want to pay it off at some point, there are no penalties for ending early, and we can just pay off the rest whenever we're ready. And we opted to have it put up in the loft because, as I've mentioned in some of our previous videos, we eventually want to get rid of this cupboard altogether so that we can convert this space in the bathroom into a proper walk-in shower. That will only happen later down the line, but we wanted to put the groundwork in now so that we didn't have to make huge changes when it came to that point. When the surveyor came from the company to look at our system and give us a quote, he took a look at the boiler, which was previously in this cupboard, and he told us that it would be very easy for us to put the boiler up in the loft. And essentially all we would need to do is just extend this pipework up the wall to connect to the new boiler. One thing he did point out was that the cold water in this bathroom was also fed from the same header tank as the hot water system. So that meant there would have to be some adjustment up in the loft to connect the cold water for the bathroom to the new mains water feed that would be going up the wall here. But it was all part of the plan, and he was happy to sign off on that. And he gave us a good price, and we accepted. A couple of weeks later, the installer turned up to do the work, and the first thing he told us was that the old boiler actually used the wrong gauge of gas pipe work and that the surveyor who'd come previously was incorrect to have told us that we could just extend the gas pipe straight up into the loft. Instead, he told us that he would have to tee off this gas line that comes off this meter at the front of the property and then go out of the front of the property, up the wall here, and then up into the loft. The gas line would then come in and to the new boiler position here up in the loft. The other thing that we talked about was this massive header tank that was here, along with a second header tank for the central heating system. All of that was to be taken out because, of course, a Combi boiler doesn't need a header tank, and that was the whole reason we wanted to install one, was that we could get proper mains water pressure for hot and cold water. He didn't talk about the exact route that the gas pipe would take coming through the loft, but I assumed it would be pretty obvious. He would just come in at the front there and go along one of the beams and then come into where the boiler position is. Same thing for the header tank. I assumed that he would just take everything out. We did also think he was going to take the platform, which we were later told was not part of the remit, but okay, whatever. And then the new cold water feed that feeds the boiler and also back down to the bathroom would just be connected up to a water pipe which comes up a riser at the back there. We did explain to him that we were wanting all of this removed so that we could board the space and potentially in the future maybe even look at doing a loft conversion. So as it was a normal working day, I left him to it and I went to do my work in my office. And occasionally he came and asked me a few questions and we had a chat and everything seemed pretty good. However, at one point he did tell me that he'd had a little bit of a mishap and that a bit of water had backwashed through the system when he was busy connecting up the cold water to the new connection. And he mentioned that a bit of water had leaked through the floor and downstairs. But it didn't sound like it was too big a deal, and he didn't say that there was any need for concern, so it was all good. However, later that evening, after he'd gone home, I was walking through the lounge and I happened to step on the carpet, and I realized that a huge section of the carpet was completely saturated with water, to the point where you could actually see the water. It was that wet. And then I looked up and realized that the ceiling had also been damaged where the water had run through. Clearly this was a lot of water. I mean, it must have been litres and litres of water that poured through the ceiling. So that wasn't so good, and after a few days the carpet really started to smell because the water had picked up a lot of dust and mould and whatever else was down in between the floor joist and deposited it all into the carpet. And by the time I found out about it, that water had seeped right through to the underlay, and even though I tried to towel it up, it was there for a good long time and it started to smell pretty badly. The next morning, before he arrived back again, I came up into the loft to have a look at what he'd done, and I was quite disappointed to see that what he had done is just connected the cold water feed to a pipe that was already running up and over the top of the platform. And that meant that there was just no way that we could ever remove the platform because the cold water feed was just running over the top of it. So when he turned up, I asked him about it and I explained that we really wanted to get rid of the platform altogether, as I had the previous day. And he said, well, it's just too much work for me to do that. You'll just have to get another plumber in to do it at a later stage when you want to remove the platform. And that was the end of the conversation. He made it quite clear that there was no way he was going to be moving it. And so he continued with his work. And on the second day, he ran most of these pipes that you can see, which, you know, I think is a pretty reasonable job. An electrician turned up as well to connect up the power for the boiler, and we explained to him the plan to eventually get rid of this cupboard. So what he did is he left a bit of extra cable up here so that when we want to remove this connection unit, which then connects up to the boiler, we can just take it out of the wall at that point and install it on this front wall here. And the extra cable was to allow us to move it to a position which is a bit more suitable for that new installation. So that was very thoughtful and I was very impressed with that. By the end of the second day, things were still quite a long way from being done, and he told us he would have to come back the third day to install all of the gas pipe work up the front of the property. At that point, he told me he was quite surprised that the surveyor had quoted for a 2-day job when clearly there was way too much work to get done in 2 days, and he wasn't sure how they were going to make a profit. With that, he left, and on the morning of the third day, he returned to install all the gas pipe work. And this took him pretty much the entire day to run these pipes and then also to bleed the system and do all of the testing. I don't really have any knowledge of how long it takes to install these sort of things, so, you know, as far as I'm concerned, he was working the whole day, so he must have been busy with something. But it was getting very late on Friday evening by the time he was finished up. We were gone 6 o'clock. We wanted to just get all the paperwork signed so that we could relax and he could go home. and he presented me with a feedback sheet. Now at the time I hadn't really looked over what he'd done. I had seen his work with the pipe running over the top of the platform, which I'd already said I wasn't very happy about. But quite honestly, with him standing there watching me while I filled in the feedback sheet, I just ticked all the boxes and said yes to everything, and I was prepared to just let it go. However, after he'd left, I then came up into the loft and I discovered what he'd done with the gas pipe. And quite honestly, I'll show you some pictures of it. This really does not seem safe to me at all. It was this long length of gas pipe running right through the middle of the loft space, so completely preventing any kind of use of that space whatsoever. It was only clipped in one place across the whole length of the ceiling. And also, it was just really ugly. It came in on the left-hand side of the truss and then bent round to the right-hand side of the truss where it was attached with a single clip. And then over this pipework and then down and then up again to the boiler. Just looked like a real mess. And as far as I'm concerned, I wouldn't be proud of work like this. On the plus side, we do now have incredible pressure in the shower. It's almost like an acupuncture session. It's very nice. And the water heats up very quickly. No complaints with the boiler or the pressure. Everything there is absolutely wonderful. But as we walked around and looked at things, we discovered more and more places where this installer really just clearly didn't give a damn. There were just marks all over the walls. There were stains in the carpet. I mean, the carpets were in pretty poor condition already, as you well know. But quite honestly, that doesn't absolve a company of preventing them getting any worse. So although we were impressed with the system, we really weren't impressed with the installation. So we decided to write to the company and tell them about the various things that we weren't happy with and try and get them to resolve them. This turned into quite a lengthy and rather unpleasant back and forth. Essentially, the owner of the company told me that because I had agreed to the works before the engineer had started, and also because I'd filled in that feedback sheet, that we weren't entitled to any remedial works. Which we were kind of expecting to happen, but really it wasn't very professional and certainly wasn't very indicative that they were happy to try and sort things out. Eventually, I had to look up the regulations for gas pipe work and throw the rulebook at them because according to British standards, 22mm gas pipe work is supposed to be secured at a maximum of every 2 meters and it shouldn't be able to move. And that pipework that had been run in the loft was a span of nearly 3 meters with a single clip on it, and it was incredibly wobbly. You could move it back and forth really easily. It also wasn't marked as a gas pipe, so if we were to move out and new people were to move in, they wouldn't even know that it was a gas pipe. They might assume that it's just a water pipe, and it would be very easy to knock or damage in some way. So eventually I threw that at them and they seemed to then back down, and they then sent an engineer to come and fix the problems. Now again, I am not a gas engineer or a plumber, so I don't really understand the ins and outs of how difficult things are. But what I will say is that the remedial engineer that they sent moved the pipework to under this platform, so it doesn't run over the top of the platform. So it now runs along the side here and then along the back to this riser, which is under here. He also removed the dodgy gas pipe and ran it underneath this other pipework and along the ceiling joist here, where it's clipped all the way along right to the end. And all of that, which the previous engineer had said would take way too long to change, took him about 3 hours of work. He was gone by lunchtime. So at the end of that very long story, we now have a new Combi boiler, which is bang up to date, very efficient, and the water pressure is now incredible for hot and cold water. So we're very happy with this new system in general, and now we are satisfied with the installation as well, and we can go ahead and remove all of this platform stuff at some point. But I would be interested to know your thoughts. Do you think this experience is acceptable? Do you think we were asking too much? Do you think that that gas pipeline was fine? Do you think that they should have just left the pipe running over the top of this platform? Were we being unreasonable, asking them to move it? I actually don't know. I don't think that we were being unreasonable, but, you know, it would be really good to get some opinions on this. So let me know what you think. So that probably wasn't the most interesting of our videos, but as I said, we've had a bit of a quiet couple of weeks. We'll be getting back onto the normal house stuff over the next week or so. So by next week, we should have another interesting update for you. So until then, please do hit the subscribe button, and thank you very much for watching. Cheerio!